Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so glad you're here on this wonderfully beautiful, sunny July afternoon. My name is David Furman. I'm an attorney here with Altitude Community Law. I'd like to thank you for joining our presentation. On your screen, you'll see a PowerPoint presentation in the center of the screen. This should take up most of your screen. There is also a small box on the bottom right-hand side of the screen with the video feed. That's got me in it. On the left side of your menu, please select questions and answers. Type all of your questions there, which will be addressed during the webinar. I like to have a dialogue. If I'm missing a point or if you guys have a question, I do like to go through those questions as they pop up so we can make sure we cover everything. I don't like to wait till the end. So go ahead. You see the icon with a little question mark in it. That's the question. I will monitor that during the presentation, and I will answer questions as we go along. Please email education@altitude.law or call Sean directly at 303-991-2076. If you have any questions now or during the presentation or can't hear technical issues, he can take care of everything. He's an all-around go-to type of guy. So with that being said, welcome. We're going to talk about ballots, proxies, and votes. And at some point in the last 3-4 years, this has become a major issue. And owners are really starting to pay attention to how associations are conducting their votes. And to the point where, if you were following last year's, the 2021 legislative session, one of the key components of a bill that was originally introduced had the ability of an owner to actually hire election monitors and actually bring somebody in to make sure that they could review the ballots as they're being cast and make sure that you go through and everything is above board. And the HOA elections starting to be hotly contested. So this is something that the association can look at and really should start to firm up as it moves forward. So we start off with a little humor. You know, when everybody screams and yells at the board, nobody likes what the board's doing, and then you ask for volunteers and, you know, everybody puts their hands down. Nobody wants to hear it. Nobody wants to do it. They just want to throw rocks. So I do want to thank everybody here trying to learn more so we can define rocks a little bit better. Okay. Why do we care about ballots and proxies and elections and the other fine stuff? Well, it's because you have to. Meetings of unit owners as members of the association shall be held at least once each year. That's a statutory requirement set forth in the Colorado Common Interest Ownership Act. So while I know some associations would like to just turn their back and say, we don't have to have a meeting, well, you have to. Do elections have to take place during the annual meeting? Well, again, the Nonprofit Act says all directors shall be elected, appointed, or designated as provided in the bylaws. So yeah, you're going to have an election just about every year. It's a mandatory requirement. So long as you're getting quorum at your meetings, you should be having elections. If you've got staggered terms, you're going to be electing a certain proportion of every year. If you don't have staggered terms, you're still probably electing a board every year. In general, unless otherwise provided by the bylaws, any action that may be taken in an annual or regular special meeting of members may be taken without a meeting through an action by written ballot. Now, this is CRS 7127-109. And this became a very large topic last year as we had to go to these hybrid meetings and as we had to go to non-in-person meetings. How were you conducting business? How were you allowing owners to vote during the lockout or during the period of time where you couldn't obtain a quorum? And we do have a question of, what if we're not able to reach a quorum? That is a really good question. And if you can't obtain a quorum, unfortunately, you can't have a meeting or you can't have an election. You can still have a meeting, but you can't have an election. And if you can't have an election, another provision of the Nonprofit Act says board members continue to serve until their successors are duly elected. So if you don't have a quorum, you don't have an election, the existing board members will continue to serve until their successors are elected. I do recommend, though, given the current current time we live in right now, that you should absolutely attempt to have another meeting. Send something out. If your bylaws, many bylaws will say you can reduce your quorum requirement by half if you don't have a quorum at the meeting. So go ahead and reduce the quorum requirement if you have the ability to reduce the quorum requirement. Or again, what I would highly recommend you do is go ahead and send a notice out to all the owners again and say, look, we didn't get quorum. We really need a quorum to have an election. I've noticed more participation at meetings now than in historically. So I think some of the quorum pressures are starting to ease, but that's what I would do. You can't have a vote without a quorum. So elections. This is kind of where I said you're going to have an election every year. The Condominium Act requires, if you are formed, if you manage a condominium or are part of a condominium association that has not opted into Kiowa and is created prior to July 1st, 1992, you were formed under the Condominium Act. And the Colorado Supreme Court has reminded us that yes, in fact, the Condominium Act is still a thing. It requires staggered terms. It requires that at least 1/3 of the positions come up for election every year. Now, when I say it requires staggered terms, that's a little bit of a misnomer. What it does require is that at least 1/3 of the positions come up for election every year. If you have a board that serves 1-year terms, your entire board may come up for election every year. So you don't necessarily have staggered terms. The entire board's up for election every year, which is greater than 1/3. And as I mentioned, that only applies to pre-Kiowa communities created before July 1st, 1992. Kiowa requires secret ballots for contested elections. And that is unless you live in a community that has delegate voting. Delegate voting does not have to be done by secret ballot. But other than that, if you have a contested election, which is defined as more candidates than seats available, that's a contested election. It must be done by secret ballot, which when, again, you're having a hybrid meeting or you're having a meeting that you can't really vote by Zoom, we're going to talk about strategies to have your vote by mail. Ballots must also be counted by neutral third parties or a committee of volunteers. They are appointed by the chair of the meeting. Any association-owned units may not cast a vote, and that's just for post-Kiowa communities. So if you live in a post-Kiowa community, the association cannot cast a vote for those units it may own. Okay? Physical meetings. What do you do in physical meetings? Well, you have your check-in, you establish a quorum, and you have to look at your bylaws to find out what your quorum requirement is. You go through and determine if you have that number of people or that amount of allocated interest. Now, again, another challenge that some associations have, if you live in a condominium community that votes by allocated interest, you actually count quorum by allocated interest, not by physical bodies present or proxies present. So you have to be able to tabulate based on the percentage ownership interest. When you get there, the owners exchange their proxies for ballots. This is one of the things that we're going to talk about a little bit later into this class is proxies are only an authorization for somebody to act on behalf of somebody else. It's not a ballot. You have to change that proxy for a ballot for that owner to actually vote or take action. So if I walk into your meeting and I have 4 proxies, you should hand me 5 ballots, 1 for my own unit and then 1 for every proxy I hold. Okay. Do I have suggestions of how to get delegates for a large association with no volunteers for some election districts? Recruit them. Go out, see if there's anybody interested. It really is. It does take the board or the other delegates. They need to go out and they need to talk. They need to talk to the people. They need to get volunteers in. It's kind of the same way if you're looking for volunteers to serve on the board. It's strong arm tactics. Come and get them. Owners in your delegate district, if you don't have a delegate, you're not represented. And it's letting everybody know. It's education, it's mailings, it's getting interest that they really do need to come in and participate. Okay. Do you have the candidates introduce themselves? There's absolutely nothing in the statute that mandates candidates be allowed to introduce themselves. Obviously, I think it's a really good idea, but it should be in the agenda. You let the attendees ask questions. I don't necessarily like allowing attendees to ask questions of the candidates at that meeting. If you have such an interest of members serving on the board, and if you have such an interest of owners in that way, I recommend associations have a meeting prior to the day of the election. Meet the candidates forum, just something very informal to allow the candidates to speak, allow the candidates to meet the constituents, allow constituents to ask questions, but it's not actually happening at the annual meeting. Because if it's happening at the annual meeting, your 1 to 2 to 3 hour annual meeting all of a sudden goes 9 to 10 to 12 hours. I'm being a little facetious, but obviously if you have an Ask the Candidate forum at the meeting, you've got to allow equal opportunity or equal questions to each candidate. And I would highly recommend having that outside of the meeting or done before. If the association owns units, do they count as quorum? No, they don't count as quorum. You take those are non-eligible votes. You just take them right out of the quorum calculation. Another question. 2 or 3 people tend to get a large number of proxy forms. If there must be 1 ballot per proxy form, this means that people must fill out numerous ballots. Yeah, sure does. And I highly recommend it, because remember, ballots are subject to inspection and copying. And if you don't have the number of ballots equaling the number of people you said were at the meeting, it creates confusion, it creates conflict. I would, yes, if I walk into your meeting with 100 proxies, hand me 100 ballots or 101. Yes, I want 1 ballot per person, and rather than just 1 ballot per, if I have 50 proxies, I fill out 1 ballot and just write 50 on it. It also creates problems if you have allocated voting. How does that count where you just hand me 1 ballot and it doesn't account for my 0.2 and my 0.3 and my 0.1 votes? You need to be able to tie those up. So yes, you should absolutely hand that number of ballots to that person. They just need to fill those out. Okay, nominations from the floor. Is it required if you are conducting the election at the meeting? Yes, you have to allow nominations from the floor. Your ballot's not set yet, so you might as well go ahead and just allow nominations from the floor. You have write-in candidates. Okay, another question real quick. Let me grab this. Okay. How do we do all this if Zoom meeting? Well, you don't. That's next. This is at your physical meeting. This is not a Zoom meeting. This is a physical meeting where at a Zoom meeting, you can still check in, you can still establish quorum. You can't really exchange proxies. You have to be able to, if they're coming in with proxies, those need to be given to the association prior to the commencement of the meeting, so you know who's going to be there and who's going to be representing individual people. You can't just hand them in at the door. They actually have to be given to the association prior to it. Proxies become effective as to the association when received by the association. So if nobody's there to take a proxy at the meeting, it's not received. So the proxy itself is ineffectual. Okay. Can I repeat about quorum? What part about quorum? That you have to have it to have a vote? Yes, you have to have it to have a vote. If you don't have it at the meeting, you can't have a vote. You have an informational meeting and then send out notice again for a second meeting. Okay, I've prepared ballots with incremental values of 5 ballot equals 5 votes. So someone with 25 proxies would receive 5 ballots. Yes, it's okay. I don't necessarily like it. But again, it's if you're dealing with all the votes are equal and you have big bulk votes like that, yeah, you can rank your ballots to 5s and assuming again they're voting all the same way. That's another thing, is they all have to vote the same way for those 5 ballots. So yes, it is okay. It's fine to deal with it that way. I just like this concept of 1 ballot per proxy so that your numbers are equal. I said some don't count. Oh, for association-owned units, if an association owns a unit and can't vote it doesn't count towards quorum because it's a non-eligible voting unit. Okay, let me see. But Zoom occupants can vote secretly. Not on the technology I've seen. And if the question is, if Zoom occupants can vote privately, where's the ballot? How are you printing that ballot out? How are you accounting for that ballot? How are you making that ballot available for inspection and copying? I don't believe Zoom voting, it can be done secretly. You don't have a physical paper trail of that. And it makes it exceedingly difficult, which is why we have been advising you to have, if you have a contested election, have the vote outside of the meeting, which we will discuss in 1 second, right after I deal with this. Great, thanks, we're all good. Okay, moving on. Physical meeting proxy, what is it? Well, by definition, it is a person who is substituted or deputed by another to represent him or her and act for him or her, particularly in some meeting or public body. And that's out of Black's Law Dictionary. How is this great appointment done, you may ask? Well, 7-127-203 states, unless otherwise provided in the bylaws, a member entitled to vote may vote in person or otherwise act in person or by proxy. So it's a guaranteed right by statute. Kiowa actually takes it one further and says you may vote in person or by proxy. So you have this obligation to allow proxies. Your appointment. Well, 7-127-203-2 states, without limiting the manner in which a member may appoint a proxy to vote or otherwise act for the member, the following shall constitute valid means of such appointment. And it's, a member may appoint a proxy by signing an appointment form. I, David, hereby appoint somebody else to vote for me. Hand it to the association. That's a valid form, or that's a valid manner of appointing a proxy. Okay. A member may appoint a proxy by transmitting or authorizing the transmission of a telegram, teletype, and the new part, or other electronic transmission providing a written statement of the appointment to the proxy. To the proxy holder. So your proxies don't even really need to be signed. It's, yes, I may appoint by signing an appointment form, or I can in turn send an email to the association. I can't attend the meeting on July 2nd. I hereby give my proxy to X. That is a valid proxy appointment. Proxies are, as I mentioned before, they're effective as to the association upon receipt. So the minute I hit send on that proxy or on that email, I have given my proxy. And once that's done, it's over. I have given it to somebody else, and there are now specific ways I must act to revoke it, and proxies are fully revocable, but that is something that now has to happen. That person has the ultimate authority to go to that meeting and act on my behalf, and the association has every right to rely on that proxy without without having to worry about any fraud or recounting votes or anything like that. The board or the association is allowed to rely on that proxy. And the question is, let me see, we got one. Can you pull a member in the Zoom chat and record that copy of the ballot? No one but the manager will see this. I don't know. Bottom line, no. They need to be able to sit there and vote for or against the matter, and they need to be able to have a physical paper. I think it's much easier to have ballots when you're dealing with secret ballots for an election, not doing it that way. I just think it's best practice. And then another question, can a homeowner have tenants be a proxy? Absolutely. This is another thing that you may think. There is no mandate that an owner act as a proxy for another owner. I can give my proxy to anybody. If I live in a community and I can't attend the meeting, I can pick somebody off the corner and say, dear corner person, will you go to this meeting for me and cast a ballot? That's a valid proxy. That person now stands in my shoes and goes to this meeting and votes. It does not have to be an owner. It can be a tenant. It can be anybody that shows up for that person. Okay? All right. What if we're not able to wait? We have printed all secret votes and collected them. We have printed all secret votes and collected. Okay. So it's, again, it's best practice. I think you are, when trying to deal with voting by Zoom, now this isn't electronic voting through an electronic voting company, but trying to do it on Zoom, it's really risky, and I think it's going to be subject to challenge, both the fact that it's probably not secret and you don't have the paper trail that goes with it. Just my opinion on this, and I think it would be subject to challenge. I have been asked as managers to vote proxies. What is your position on that? I don't like it. I think it puts you managers in a bad position if you're trying to vote proxies for others. Then all of a sudden there's the scream of you're just protecting your own interest. You're trying to vote for yourself. You're trying to make sure that you stay in power. I don't like it. It's not illegal. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. Like I said, anybody can be a proxy. I just don't like it. I think it's the optics of it. It's not a legal issue. It's just the optics of it. If you can find somebody else to act for the proxy holder or the owner, that would be my preference. But like I said, there's nothing illegal about it. It's just the optics. Okay. All right. Directed versus general. And there's this great concept of directed proxies that informs the proxy holder how to act. It is a contract between the owner and the proxy holder. Does the association have to verify how the proxy holder votes? Absolutely not. Your job, association. Somebody hands you a proxy. You hand them a ballot. You don't sit there and I've known managers that want to pre-fill out the ballot for that person that hands a directed ballot. That's not your job. The directed proxy should be given to somebody the proxy giver trusts and to go act on their behalf. Just because somebody gives a directed proxy, you, the association, do not guarantee that it's voted that way. You have no obligation to check that out. You have no obligation to verify how those are done. General proxies. The holder may act in all instances on behalf of the owner with no specific instructions. So essentially, if I give you a general proxy, you can go to the meeting, it's done. You can do whatever you want. I trust you enough to go look out for your best interest and my best interest. It's usually where our interests are aligned. It's also can be used for quorum-only proxies. It's this concept of, I don't want anybody to go vote for me, but I do want the association to reach quorum, which essentially means you're just abstaining at the meeting. It's great for making quorum, not so great for voting and letting everything be done right. Okay. If a proxy is received and no one is designated, does the vote automatically go to the board member? No. If a proxy is received and nobody's designated, it's an ineffectual proxy, unless you've put instructions in the proxy that says, if nobody's designated, that goes to the board. But if it's just a proxy, I hereby let blank act on my behalf, no, that's an ineffectual proxy. It didn't assign the rights to anybody, and therefore it's a worthless proxy. Okay. All right, let me see. Proxies have been assigned to manager. That works correct. Proxies have been assigned to manager. Yes, again, it's not illegal. It's one of those things that the optics are questionable. Can a homeowner have the community manager vote for them? Again, yes. A lot of these same questions popping up. If you have a quorum at an annual meeting and need to do a secret ballot, would you only mail ballots to those who attend the meeting in person or proxy? What time? No. Okay, that's again a really good question. If you have a quorum at an annual meeting, but because you're doing it by Zoom and you need to do it by mail, that is an entire different process. So you starting over, you had your annual meeting, you had a quorum, all was good. You now have to have your election, and you start over. Everybody gets a ballot that's eligible to vote, whether they attended or not. It's an entirely different process. So you do have to mail those ballots out to everybody again. Let me see. What about the proxy that states vote with the majority? It's who gets to vote with the majority. It's if the proxy is blank as to who gets to cast those votes, how can you have somebody vote with the majority? You still have to have that proxy go to somebody. It can't just say vote with the majority. So that would, again, be an ineffectual proxy. Rather than exchanging proxy forms for ballots, which disassociates them, is it permissible to simply staple the proxy forms to the, wait for it, to the ballot? yes, it's fine, but if you've got a secret ballot, why are you then attaching something to it that identifies it? Proxies and ballots are two different things, guys. It's the proxy is somebody can vote on my behalf. The ballot is just the ballot. Why would you attach them? Why they can be disassociated. It's absolutely irrelevant whether or not those were cast. Now, if you're talking directed proxies, again, not your job to verify. You take the directed proxy, you put it in one pile, you give them the ballot, they go vote. Not the association's job. Is it okay for a proxy form to default to being assigned to the president? Absolutely. It can name a person, it can name the board, and then if it names the board, it can vote with the majority. Or if you have proxies that named the board as the proxy holder, that means the board needs to get together and vote on how to cast those ballots. Because again, remember, the proxy is just authorization to act on somebody's behalf. So if somebody says, I hereby give my proxy to the board to vote however the board seems appropriate, that means the board needs to go over and actually take a vote on how to vote. Make sense? Okay, moving on. All right, proxy, general rules for proxies. How long are they good for? Unless if they are undated, they're good for 11 months from receipt. A shorter period can be specified, such as annual meeting in 2021. Well, that's good for the annual meeting 2021, and then it goes away. If not, they're good for 11 months. And again, the whole concept is you don't just give somebody your proxy and they can go do it into perpetuity. It's fiscal year to fiscal year, annual meeting to annual meeting. Must they be signed? As I mentioned, not necessarily. You don't necessarily sign an email. You don't necessarily sign a telegram. You don't necessarily sign a teletype. It's just so you know who it's coming from. Now, if I show up at the meeting or if I go door to door collecting proxies, then yes, they do need to be signed because it's a signed document or an electronically transmitted document. Okay. Are they revocable? Absolutely. Proxies are revocable. How, you may ask, may a person revoke? Well, if the person gives a proxy and then attends at the meeting and votes in person, the proxy is revoked. If I just attend the meeting, my proxy holder can still vote on my behalf because they have my proxy. But if I show up at the meeting and then state, oh, hey, board, just kidding, I want to vote, that proxy is automatically revoked. Or I can deliver a writing revoking the proxy. I can send an email and say, hey, just kidding, guys, I don't want that person to be my proxy. That is effectual. It terminates the proxy. Now, getting back to how you deal with that, I would take the proxy and the termination form and put those together so you know exactly why a vote wasn't counted or a vote wasn't done. All right. If the proxy says vote 1 and they vote for 3, is it an invalid proxy? No, because again, the proxy holder gave their proxy to somebody else. That person had to be trusted. You don't verify it. It doesn't invalidate the proxy. It doesn't invalidate the vote. It just means the proxy holder can't be trusted, and next year I better not give it to them again. Can tenants attend an annual meeting with or without a proxy? Not necessarily. A tenant these are private meetings. They are meetings of the members. A tenant must have written authorization to act on behalf of the owner to attend the meeting. Now, if my tenant shows up and says, hey, I live in this unit, you can say, great, we'll see you. But if they show up and say, hey, my landlord says I can attend, they can attend. And that's in section 308 of Kiowa. All right, let me ask this question. Do bylaws state if a director or general do bylaws state if a director? No, they don't, not normally. A general proxy is really just, again, it's something the association, okay, let me take a step back. There is no form proxy. The statute does not say use this proxy, or the statute doesn't come up with a proxy form. The statute just says you can vote in person or by proxy, and then is very liberal in what constitutes a proxy. So your bylaws probably do not state whether a directed proxy is required or a general proxy is required. Your bylaws probably just state persons can vote in person or by proxy. So, but look at your proxy. Some bylaws do have restrictions on proxies and how they can be cast. How long do proxies and sign-in sheets have to be maintained by the association? Excellent question. 1 year from the date the election to which they, or the meeting to which they were used. So it's on an annual cycle. When you have your election, you keep all of the ballots, all of the proxies, all of the sign-in sheets, all of the implements of the election for a period of 1 year. When you roll around to your next meeting, you destroy those, you keep all the new ones. So it's 1 year meeting to meeting. All righty, here we go. General rules, who keeps them? Good question. See, right in there. The association for a period of 1 year from the election they were used. See, you were just ahead of the slides. Can they be inspected? Absolutely. They are a record of the association. They are a record of the election or the meeting. They may be inspected upon 10 days notice. And thanks to the mandates of 1229, signed by Governor Polis on July 2nd, you must make them available within 10 days of request. If you don't make them available within 10 days of request, you could be subject to presumed damages, $50 a day with a cap of $500 if you don't provide them. Make sure you keep them. Make sure they are readily available. Make sure you have them so you can go ahead and make them available for inspection and copying for 1 year from the date upon which they were used. Make sense? Most excellent. Okay. Continuing. Okay. Coming back to the physical meetings. And again, this is how we're voting now. So we've got the proxies, everybody signed in, you've given ballots to everybody. We're back to physical meetings because everybody missed and loved each other and they wanted to come to the meeting. If you have an uncontested election, you can vote by acclamation, meaning owners, we have 3 positions and 3 candidates. Do we accept this slate of candidates? And everybody says, yes, I vote by acclamation. Everybody goes, yay. You're really not voting. You're just approving it because it's not contested. You can do that by hand, by voice vote. You don't even need ballots. All is great. And again, that's assuming you have quorum. Contested elections. Secret ballots are still required. That part of 1229 was ripped out, which means you have no identifiable marks on the ballot. Okay, how do you do this? Well, if you have equal voting, it's just, again, ballots for proxies. Ballots for proxies, it is owners that attend, you hand them the ballot. The secret ballots are then collected. There are no identifying marks on them. They go to those volunteers to count the ballots. The volunteers cannot be current board members, can't be spouses of current board members, can't be candidates, shouldn't be managers, shouldn't be attorneys. It should be members in the community, and they should go off and they should do the counting. Again, where are the proxies? Well, the proxies are sitting with the person that signed in the people. You hand the proxies to the association at check-in or before. The association keeps them. The association always keeps them. They become property of the association. Anybody that comes and says, I want my proxy back, well, great, that proxy is then revoked. If an owner comes, or if a proxy holder comes in and says, that proxy was given to me, it's mine, I want it back, no, they don't get it back. If they take it back, they are no longer proxies because that proxy is no longer with the association. They are only effective as to the association. The association must keep them. So the volunteers go out, count the ballots, they come back, they announce the election. Great, you got a board, everybody loves it. You save the ballots, you save the proxies, you move on. Okay. Let me see toward the. Okay. Oh, I'm going the other way. Sorry. Please confirm as a limited expense community exempt from Kiowa created in 2006, we do not necessarily need to conduct secret ballot elections. You don't necessarily need to conduct secret ballot elections as a Kiowa exempt community. No. The Nonprofit Act does not contain a similar provision. So you're good to go. Did Polis sign 1310? Now, we're not talking about 1310 today, people. If you want to talk signs, That was last week or next week. I'm doing it again. We'll have fun. Yes, but Governor Cipolla signed 1310. Signs, freedom of speech are now protected. That's a different class. I don't want to get into it again. It was all sorts of fun. But yes, he did sign it. Okay. So, elections, again, by written ballot. Well, if you're doing it by written ballot, you're doing it by mail. So you check in. Yeah, okay. Establish quorum. Yeah, you got to count them. You got to make sure you got a quorum. Proxies. Here's the deal with proxies. If you're doing it by mail ballot or by written ballot, you don't necessarily need proxies to establish a person's right to vote. And the reason I say this is because you are giving direct access to the ballot to everybody. And all a proxy does, remember, a proxy is just somebody giving somebody else their right to vote. So if you get a ballot and you can cast it directly, you don't necessarily need a proxy. So if you're doing a written ballot election, there's no need for proxies. So the proxies kind of go away. Now I will throw a caveat on that, and I'm sure a couple questions will pop up. All right. When you do elections by written ballot, the association must deliver a written ballot to every member entitled to vote. The written ballot must contain a list of candidates running. So it's got to have A, B, and C candidate. Must contain a blank for a write-in candidate. Again, if somebody didn't get a chance, you're not doing the election at a meeting anymore, so they don't have the chance to self-nominate, so you put in a write-in candidate ability. It must be accompanied by a solicitation letter, which includes the number of responses needed to meet a quorum, percentage of approvals necessary for the candidate to be elected, majority, date, time in which the ballot must be returned to be counted. It must have the date and time, and if it's not returned in time, it cannot be counted. 5 p.m. the day before an annual meeting, or 5 p.m. July 7 means 5 p.m. July 7. Must be accompanied by written information sufficient to allow an informed decision. Now, this doesn't necessarily apply to board member elections, but it might. We usually that if you're amending your declaration or if you're amending your bylaws, you've got to have enough information as to make an informed decision. Now, what does this mean for candidates? Well, you may want to include a candidate statement. Hi, my name's Joe. I own Unit X. This is why I'm running for the board. And then you can make a decision whether I'm the right candidate or not. Unlike proxies, written ballots cannot be revoked unless specifically permitted for in the bylaws. So since most bylaws are silent on written ballots, they cannot be revoked. Okay. What if a ballot is received by mail? Do we still need a proxy to attain quorum? No. Again, getting to if you are conducting your election by mail, what happens at your meeting is irrelevant. The ballot counts, the election by mail counts as the meeting. It does not count towards quorum of your meeting at all. The proxies can be used at the meeting, but what happens at the meeting? Well, at an annual meeting, we talk about it. Usually an election. Well, we're doing the election by mail, so that doesn't count anymore. Approval of a budget. Well, approval of a budget doesn't require a quorum either by statute. So what happens at your meeting is very limited now if you're conducting your elections outside of it. Okay. Can you combine proxy for quorum purposes with a ballot on a single dock? So what you're trying to do now is create, which I've got at the end of it, this concept of a proxy ballot. And there is no such thing as a proxy ballot. You have a proxy or you have a ballot. Now, can you put a proxy on the top half and a ballot on the second half? Yes. And then just they need to be separated. Because again, proxies are not ballots. And how can you have a secret ballot if you have a contested election? By identifying who the proxy is on top. And if the proxy holder is giving their ballot to somebody else, how does that work? Okay, you've got to get out of your mind that the ballots and proxies are related. They're not. Two different things doing two different jobs. A proxy is meant to allow somebody to vote for them. The ballot is the vote. Two different jobs. Do all of these general standards you mentioned pertain to special assessments as well, or only for elections? How does it differ? Well, special assessments, depending on your declaration, may not require a vote of the owner, or may require a rejection or veto of the owners. So when you're using a ballot, it is usually for the affirmative vote of an owner. Elect a board, approve a declaration amendment, approve a bylaw amendment, approve something else, approve a loan. A special assessment, unless a special assessment requires the affirmative approval of something, it doesn't require a written ballot. It doesn't require the association to act in that certain way. You could just raise your hand and say, I object, or I don't want the special assessment, or I approve the special assessment. And pursuant to Kiowa, unless your declaration says something otherwise, special assessments are approved unless vetoed by a majority of all owners. So there you've got to check your documents. But no, these general standards apply to all proxies and all ballots. You have to have them both, which is why, again, you've got to listen to what the jobs are of these two different documents. So again, can you combine a proxy for quorum? Yes. With a ballot? Yes. But when you actually vote them, you just need to separate them. Okay? All right. Meetings versus action by written ballot. Again, a meeting includes virtual and in person. Owners can attend in person, by proxy, telephonically, virtually. They can get on this computer. They can do exactly what you're doing. You would be considered attended at this meeting. You can ask questions. I'm reading questions. We're talking in real time. You're at the meeting. How can owners vote? Well, in meetings, they can do a physical ballot. We've been talking about it. By voice, by hands. I've heard a parliamentarian say, one way to kind of break up the meeting is everybody stand up. If you vote for a certain action, go to the left side of the room. And if you vote against it, go to the right side of the room. It's just physical separation, then you count. Makes it really easy. That's another way you can vote. The only thing that is required to be a secret ballot or written ballot is contested elections. Everything else can be open. Everything else can be done by voice or by hand, by physical ballot. If you want to do a physical ballot for it, you can absolutely do that. Or you can, like I said, you can separate everybody. But that's how you have historically done the job. Now, the only wrinkle to all this, like I said, is this concept of a secret ballot for a contested election at a virtual meeting. You don't really know how to do that, and there's no real good way to do that. Now, you've mentioned you can do this chat feature, and I've got the chat feature or the question feature that, you guys may not be able to see and I can see, and you can say every owner. The problem you have is, you don't really know where some of this is coming from, and printing out the record, and you've got to have the ballot. You need to make sure that person ballots with the proxy, where it is just cleaner to do it by mail ballot. And that also takes the election out of the meeting itself, so you can more efficiently run your meeting. Okay. Meetings versus action by written ballot. Written ballot. It's a separate action that is not part of the meeting. That's what I've been trying to hammer home. It's two different actions. You have your meeting, you have your election. The statute says that taking action by written ballot is the same as having the meeting, or has the same effect as if done at a meeting. So it's a separate action. It's not part of the meeting. How can owners attend? Well, they turn in their ballot. How can owners vote? They turn in their ballot. What about proxies? As I mentioned, there's no real need for proxies if I give you your ballot. Because what is easier? Me filling out a ballot and mailing it versus me filling out a proxy and mailing it and not telling you how to vote. Now, I will tell you again, as these things are becoming more and more contested, I ran into a situation where the association was conducting a vote by mail, and their bylaws said owners can vote in person or by proxy. Okay? And the statute says owners can vote by person or by proxy. The association did exactly what they were supposed to do. Sent out a ballot to every owner. And an owner showed up through his attorney and said, "You going to accept proxies?" And I said, no. He says, show me where it's prohibited. And as I mentioned, the statute says nothing. The statute that allows for written ballots says nothing about proxies, but it is a vote. And the statute, Kiowa says owners can vote in person or by proxy. So what we did is we had to come to an agreement that any proxy this owner held, and he went out and he collected a bunch of proxies for this vote. They all said for this vote. And if the owner did not return a ballot, because again, we're doing a secret ballot, we're doing transmissions, secret envelopes, and tracking envelopes. So we knew which owners had returned ballots. Any owner that did not return a ballot that he had a proxy for, we allowed him to cast that ballot. So there were proxies in a mail ballot, but it was a special mechanism of doing it in that he had to show up a minute before the polls closed. If it was done at 5 o'clock the ballots had to be back by 5 o'clock on Friday. He showed up at 4:59. We went through all the ballots to find out who had voted and who had not voted and let him vote whatever proxies he had for ballots that had not been returned. So there is a way, it is a pain. There is a way to actually use proxies for a mail ballot election. It's just ugly. And I still see no reason for it because we've given everybody the absolute right to vote on their own. And if they didn't return a ballot, there was a reason they didn't return a ballot, but they had in fact signed a proxy, so we had to allow it. So yeah, you can use proxies in a mail-out ballot election. It's just they better show up at your office right before it closes and say, I have 7 proxies. Did these candidates or did these people vote? And if you can't verify they voted, you go ahead and let them vote the proxies. Okay. Proxy by written ballot. Proxy versus written ballot. These, again, they're mutually exclusive concepts. A ballot is not a proxy and a proxy is not a ballot. A proxy is only during the meeting. It allows you to act for somebody at the meeting. A written ballot only without a meeting, but the statutes, and again, as we discussed, the bylaws and the statute state you can vote in person or by proxy. So if you have a situation where somebody does show up with a proxy and they didn't vote for that meeting, you best have them. Or let me see, if it is contested, should we just email each owner? Let me see, if it's contested, should we just email each owner a ballot and give deadline to get it back? You can email, but you also have to mail. And that is the drawback because the statute mandates that you mail or otherwise deliver the ballot to every owner. So you got to mail it. I would also do email, but unfortunately, you're going to have to mail it. And what do we need to include with the ballots we're mailing to the owners? You need to include sufficient information to make them make an informed decision. It also has to include the time and date upon which it must be returned to be counted, how many ballots must be returned to meet quorum, and what percentages are required to effectuate whatever's on the ballot. If it's an election, it's the candidates getting the most votes. If it's an amendment to the declaration, it's 67% of the voting interest of the community, and the like. How do these websites that do voting, they don't get mailed, are they invalid? No. It's if you are using electronic voting, they better be mailing them too. If you're doing a vote by mail through an electronic service, that electronic service better mail the ballot with instructions, deadlines, key codes to vote, whatever it takes, sufficient information to conduct a vote. You have to mail it. And if you want to email it too, that's fine, but it must go by USPS. The statute is still, if you have a meeting of the owners, or if you're doing a mail ballot, you must mail the ballot. You must mail the packet to everybody. So if you're using an electronic online voting service, you better mail it too. Otherwise, yeah, the whole election's invalid because you didn't mail it. Ballots, general rules. They can't be revoked once cast. Must be kept for 1 year. It's a record of the election of the meeting. Unless it's for a contested election, It can identify the person casting the ballot. If it's for a contested election, it must be secret. Secret ballots, how do you do that? Or secret mail ballots, how do you do it? Well, you send the ballot, you send the instructions, you send the candidate bios. You also include a return envelope that should be stamped, doesn't have to be, but should be stamped with the return address where it comes back, and a place for the owner to fill in their unit number along with the secrecy envelope that goes inside of that. The ballot goes into the secrecy envelope that goes into the mail envelope that's returned to the election, the ballot collector. The ballot collector then in turn will log what ballots from what units they've received. Big stack, Unit 1, Unit 2, Unit 8, Unit 9, Unit 15, all cast ballots. They open, separate the tracking envelope from the secrecy envelope. The secrecy envelopes get opened by the committee that counts the ballots. And now you have mailing envelopes, secrecy envelopes, ballots that all must be kept. Oh, let me see. Outgoing mail needs to go, but the responses have to be in paper or electronic form. Yes, it is just the mailing out that has to be by mail. Coming in can be done by email, voting site, electronic site, the like. So it's the outgoing that must be by mail. The incoming does not necessarily be by mail. It can be any way that the owner chooses to return it. But if you're using an electronic voting site, you must still have the ability for somebody to cast a paper ballot. Still have to accept a paper ballot. Okay, some common misstatements that I added. Proxy ballots. What are they? Well, they don't exist. Again, they're mutually exclusive concepts. Proxies are proxies, ballots are ballots. I think really what people are starting to think of is this concept of a directed proxy, which tells an owner how to vote. But again, an owner or it tells a proxy holder how to vote, but that still needs to be converted to a ballot at the meeting. If you're conducting an election at the meeting, it still needs to be converted from a proxy to a ballot. The other concept that I didn't put up here that, again, causes great issues is this concept of a absentee ballot. You send it to owners and they want to vote their own, but you're actually having the election at the meeting. Again, two completely and totally different concepts. The absentee ballot really is not a way to vote because you're trying to mix two concepts. Again, you're either having the election at the meeting or you're having the election outside the meeting. You can't do a mail ballot that is then cast at the meeting. Mostly because if you show up at the meeting and somebody nominates themselves from the floor, you now have two different ballots. The person that's casting this secrecy ballot or this absentee ballot did not get to vote for the person that nominated at the floor. And you now have two different ballots, which, again, you're using two different statutes with two very different way of doing things. You're trying to mix them, and they don't mix. So the absentee ballot concept is just not a thing. If you are now meeting in person and we are obligated to legally to also hold the same meeting on Zoom. Yeah, you sure. Well, you're not obligated legally, but somebody can request to attend by Zoom. If you're meeting in person and somebody wants to attend by Zoom, they can. The statute allows for it. The association can accommodate it. It does become very problematic when you get to the election point and they have no real way to vote. What I've done in situations like that for some communities that have a large absentee population is we adjourn the meeting and then they can go talk to their proxy holder, and we tell everybody to send an email to the association as to who's going to vote for them. And then they go talk to their proxy holder, and then the proxy holder will come in and fill out a ballot. But it's still a combination of proxies and ballots. It's not this, we're going to let you vote online. All right. Let me see. What is this? Oh, okay. If we're now meeting in person, okay, there's that. If an owner is delinquent and in foreclosure action, can they make a motion to disapprove a special assessment? And this is specifically in regards to a special assessment to cover legal fees of the action to foreclose. The owner is retired of finding. If an owner is, it depends on if the owner's a good if you have the ability in your bylaws to prohibit an owner from voting. If you don't have the ability to suspend an owner's voting right, yeah, they can get up and they can say, I don't want to, I don't think we should I don't think we should approve the special assessment because. No, he's got to get up and say, and yeah, it's because I owe the association X number of dollars and I don't want to pay it. They've got, it's a hard justification, but unless you have the ability to suspend his voting rights, yeah, he's got a right to make that motion. Can we require that a meeting is held in person and not allow a Zoom or phone? No, you can't. There's a statutory provision that states any owner has the right to attend a meeting telephonically or some other way, some other electronic means. So you don't necessarily have to set it up for them. I mean, I think you should, but it does, an owner has a right to attend that way. So you can't now just exclude that type of forum. What about regular board meetings with no election? What about regular board meetings with no election? There's no voting only the board votes at a regular board meeting. Now, if you're talking about board member proxies, well, board member proxies must be first allowed for in your bylaws. Secondly, board member proxies must be directed proxies, meaning I, board member 1, give my vote to board member 2 on the painting contract and I want to vote this way, and on the landscaping contract, I vote for this landscaper. It has to be that specific because each board member has an independent fiduciary obligation to become informed, and they can't just give their vote to some other board member. They have to actually exercise their right to vote through a directed proxy. If that was the question. Okay. All right. Can all the nominees be from the floor? No names pre-written on the ballots. Can they? Yeah. It's again, it's if you don't know who's going to be running, you can make the ballot at the actual meeting and say, everybody, okay, here are your people, write them in. You can have a blank ballot, absolutely, if it's done at the meeting that way. There's no mandate it be pre-filled out. All right, let me see. What if you don't have the infrastructure to accommodate electronic meetings at the same time as an in-person meeting? Well, that's why I said you don't necessarily have to provide for it, but you do have to allow it. If an owner wants to attend a meeting by Zoom, he can show up or he can send his cell phone to somebody and say, can you put this on the table on Zoom and I'll log in? They can make their own arrangements. You have to allow it, but you don't have to pay for it or accommodate it. Let me see. If someone wants to attend by Zoom and the internet is not working, no, it doesn't invalidate your meeting. It just means this person wasn't able to attend and you made every effort. It just didn't work out. That there are always going to be technology snafus. You tried real hard. That's why you don't necessarily. Now, don't self-sabotage your meeting, but you can absolutely, you don't necessarily, again, it's the owner's obligation to make sure the technology works. All right, let me see. Last couple of questions, and then I'll let you go for the day. I mean, do we still have to Zoom with an in-person meeting? That's a really good question. And yes, you should. Again, the statute states an owner can attend any meeting of the association in person or by proxy or electronic means. Now, again, get back to that. Do you have to make it available? You have to allow it. You don't necessarily have to accommodate it. Is Zoom required for the annual meeting? Again, absolutely not. It's not required. It has just become a thing since the lockout that people kind of expect it. And you can say it's going to be an in-person meeting. The association will not be conducting it by Zoom. And then if somebody wants to attend it by Zoom, they have to arrange for it themselves. Getting back to that concept of, yeah, the statute allows attendance telephonically or by Zoom or by other technology, but the association doesn't have to pay for it. It's a service to your owners. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. It has been an absolute pleasure, an absolute treat. Go forth, have a good time, have a wonderful day and a wonderful weekend. And if you're coming to these annually or monthly, you get me again next month. So we'll see everybody. Have a good time.